Laudetur Jesus Christus. Praise be Jesus Christ. And welcome to Vatican Radio's live streamed broadcast of Pope Francis' audience to the members of the Diplomatic Corps, which takes place each year right around the time after Epiphany in the Hall of Benedictions in St. Peter's Basilica. My name is Christopher Wells. I'll be providing the English language translation for today's audience. We will begin with the address of the Dean of the Diplomatic Corps. That is Mr. George Politis, the Ambassador of Cyprus. And then our Holy Father will give his address, which is sometimes called the Pope's State of the World Address, usually reviewing some of the highlights of the year gone by and pointing out, sharing the Pope's vision for world affairs in the coming year. Whether you're joining us through the various Vatican media channels, the Vatican audio or radio app, the Vatican News web portal, or our Vatican News YouTube channel, or via one of our partner stations, including EWTN TV, Catholic Faith Network in America, Shalom World TV, Amidarshan TV, or Catholic TV, a very warm welcome to all. The Holy Father has just arrived in the Hall of Benedictions, and we will now hear an address from the Dean of the Diplomatic Corps. Once again, the Ambassador of Cyprus, Mr. George Politis. Holy Father, I am deeply honored and moved to greet you as Dean of the Diplomatic Corps. Our best wishes for good health and a fruitful continuation of your apostolic mission. Allow me to express the joy of sharing this customary moment of encounter that fills our hearts with love and symbolically shows the representatives of the states gathered around the Holy Father to the world. Your Holiness, we still have in our minds the magnificent vision of the opening of the Holy Door at St. Peter's Basilica on December 24th, which inaugurated the 27th Ordinary Jubilee. Which you, with an insightful understanding of the needs of our time, have dedicated to hope. Today's meeting is enriched by the spirit of this Jubilee. In these days, I have often reflected on the extraordinary religious and human strength of the message you have wished to send to the entire world. Permit me, Your Holiness, a personal reflection.
Mitica personificazione della speranza, ultima risorsa dell'umanità.
As a child, I used to hear stories of the myth of Pandora's box with Elpis, the mythical personification of hope, the last resource of humanity, giving people courage to face the evils that ravaged the world. Today, Your Holiness, you do not propose a consolatory myth, but speak to us of a hope that does not disappoint. Thanks to you, Holy Father, I have pondered the deep and powerful feeling that hope generates in every human being, the revolutionary message that conveys trust, future, and fraternity, even when everything around seems false, lost, or dead. Images of devastations caused by war, extreme climate events, and human solitude come to my mind. What sadness, what sorrow. Yet almost in a dream, in that deep darkness, I imagined a small flame alight. Faced with visions of an inert,
e distrutta, mi è passata
and
davanti agli
destroyed
occhi
earth,
la
I saw
figura
the
di un
image of a
seme che
seed
inizia a
beginning to
germogliare.
germinate,
I corpi spezzati della difficoltà della vita,
and bodies broken by
ho
life's
visto
difficulties.
il cuore
I saw
ricominciare
the
a
heart
battere.
beginning to beat again.
Così ho intuito la grandezza della sua scelta, santità.
Thus I
Tutti
grasped the
abbiamo
greatness of
scelte
your
di
choice,
speranza.
holiness. We
Tutti
are all
abbiamo
thirsty
sete
for
di
hope,
speranza. E in me è cresciuta la determinazione
and within
a
me
lottare per un
has grown the
futuro di
desire to
pace
fight for a
attraverso
future of
il
peace
dialogo e la
through
solidarietà.
dialogue and solidarity.
La speranza è dirompente,
Hope is disruptive,
inarrestabile di chi ha fede, fiducia
unstoppable
nel
in
prossimo,
those who have faith and
unisce le
trust in others.
generazioni, rafforza
It
le
unites
comunità.
generations and strengthens communities.
Come sempre, Santo Padre, lei ha colto i bisogni
As always,
del
Holy
nostro
Father, you have
tempo
grasped
con
the needs of our
semplicità
time
e ci ha
and have
offerto
simply
gli
provided us
strumenti
with the
per
tools to
costruire
build the
insieme
future
l'avvenire.
together.
Avere speranza, avere fiducia
To have
nella
hope,
speranza,
to trust in hope,
portare i semi della speranza,
to sow the seeds
questo
of
è il
hope.
compito che
This
ci ha
is the
voluto
task you have
assegnare
assigned to
in
us
questo
in this
anno
holy
santo.
year.
Padre Santo, nella bolla di indizione del Giubileo, spesso non confondi
Your Holiness, in the bull of indiction for the Jubilee, spes non confendit, you emphasize the importance of bringing signs of love and understanding to those who suffer the most from the imbalances of our current social system.
Solo diventando pellegrini di speranza,
Only by
per
becoming
ammalati,
pilgrims of hope
poveri,
toward the
detenuti,
sick and the poor,
migranti,
the prisoners and the
anziani,
migrants,
giovani,
the elderly and
possiamo
the young,
riattivare quel circolo
can we set
vizioso
in motion that
che
positive
attraverso
cycle
il
which, through comfort
conforto e il riconoscimento delle angosce
and
altrui,
acknowledgement of others' anxieties,
reintegra i più fragili nella famiglia
allows the
umana.
most fragile to become an
Mi
integral part
consenta di
of
ricordare
the
le sue
human family.
parole nel messaggio
Allow me, Holy Father, to
Urbi
recall
et
your
Orbi
words
di
during the
Natale.
Urbi et Orbi
La
message
porta è
on Christmas
aperta,
Day.
la porta è spalancata.
The door is
Non è
open. The door is
necessario
wide
bussare
open.
alla porta.
It is not necessary to knock on the door. It is open.
Quante volte siamo rimasti bloccati
How many
e
times have we remained
indifferenti
stuck and
per
indifferent
orgoglio o paura,
out of pride
non
or
abbiamo
fear,
colto l'occasione di
failing to seize the opportunity
riappacificarci
for reconciliation
entrando per la porta?
by entering through the door?
Troppo spesso,
Too
presi
often,
dalla frenesia
caught up in
delle
the
nostre
frenzy of our
vite,
lives,
non siamo entrati
we have
e
not
abbiamo
entered and
lasciato
allowed
che le
misunderstandings to become
incompressioni
conflicts,
divenissero conflitti e le porte aperte
and the open
si
doors
accostassero o si
to gradually
chiudessero.
close or even shut entirely.
Il suo messaggio interpella direttamente.
Your message directly
nostro
touches
ruolo
on our
di
role as
diplomatici.
diplomats, Holy Father,
Dobbiamo saper cogliere ogni
to seize
occasione
opportunities
di
for
apertura,
openness, even
anche
minimal
minima.
ones.
Ciò certamente richiede costanza,
It
impegno
requires
e come
persistence,
lei ha ricordato
commitment,
durante il suo viaggio
and
in
as you
Belgio e
reminded us during your
Lussemburgo,
trip to Belgium and
pazienza.
Luxembourg, patience.
Nel percorso di costruzione di
In the
un'Europa
process of building a
unita
united
e
and a
pacificata,
peaceful
quanta pazienza è
Europe,
stata
how much
necessaria
patience
per
was
riallacciare
needed
i
to renew
rapporti e
relations
ricostruire fiducia
and rebuild
tra le
trust
nazioni.
among nations.
Quanto tempo si deve dedicare
How much time must be devoted to welcoming migrants
alla costruzione di società
and building
multiculturali e multireligiose?
multicultural and multi-religious
Speranza e
societies?
pazienza devono essere le
Hope and
coordinate
patience must be
di
the
ogni
coordinates
buon diplomatico,
for every good
affinché
diplomat
i conflitti
so
finalmente
that conflicts
si
may finally
risolvano.
be resolved.
Nel viaggio in Indonesia lei ha incontrato il grande
During your trip to Indonesia, you met with the Grand Imam Nasruddin Umar
di Istiklal.
at the Istiklal Mosque.
Vorrei riportare le sue
Allow me to quote
affermazioni
your words
in
on that
quell'occasione.
occasion.
Tutti insieme, ciascuno coltivando la propria spiritualità e praticando
All
la
together,
propria
each
religione,
cultivating their own
possiamo
spirituality and
camminare
practicing
alla
their own
ricerca di
religion,
Dio,
we can walk
contribuire
in
a
search of
costruire
God and
società
contribute to building open
aperte,
societies
fondate
founded on
sul
mutual
rispetto
respect
reciproco
and
e
reciprocal
sull'amore
love.
vicendevole. Pochi sanno che la grande moschea e la cattedrale di Santa Maria dell'Assunzione a
Few
Jakarta
people know that the great mosque and the Cathedral of St. Mary of the Assumption in Jakarta
collegate da un tunnel
stand
che
opposite each
tutti
other
possono percorrere.
and are connected by a
Quale
tunnel that
miglior
everyone
simbolo
can
di
cross.
convivenza e rispetto
What better
reciproco?
symbol of coexistence and mutual
La
respect?
diplomazia deve avere il coraggio di essere creativa
Diplomacy must
per
have the
rafforzare
courage to be
l'unità
creative,
nella
to strengthen
diversità.
unity in
A
diversity.
Timor-Est, Papua Nuova Guinea,
In East
Singapore,
Timor, Papua New
lei,
Guinea, and
Padre
Singapore,
Santo,
you,
ha
Holy
posto
Father,
l'accento sulla necessità di
emphasize the
una
need
giusta
for just
e equa distribuzione
and
delle
equitable
risorse.
redistribution of resources,
Laddove si mitigano gli squilibri del mercato e del
where
profitto,
the
la
imbalances of the market and profit are mitigated,
e cresce.
societies
L'armonia
prosper,
tra le diverse comunità etniche,
and harmony among
culturali
different
e
ethnic,
religiose
cultural,
nel quadro del
and
bene
religious
comune.
communities grows in the framework of
Lei,
the common
Santità,
good.
ha richiamato diverse volte la
You have
comunità
repeatedly reminded the
internazionale
international community,
ad
Holy
essere
Father,
accanto ai paesi in
to stand by
difficoltà,
countries in difficulty,
perché siano società
enabling
più
them to
giuste,
become more just,
libere
free,
ed
and open
aperte.
societies.
Tra le diverse soluzioni proposte
Among the various
vi è anche
solutions
la
proposed is the cancellation of
del
economic
debito
debt contracted,
economico
often
che i
forcibly,
paesi più poveri
by poorer
hanno
countries
contratto,
towards richer ones,
spesso forzosamente nei confronti dei paesi ricchi, non per elemosina o pietà,
not
ma
out of
come
charity or pity,
risarcimento etico e
but
morale,
as an act of ethical and moral
proponendo
reparation.
infatti un diverso approccio
By
culturale.
proposing a different cultural
Lei,
approach, you, Holy
Padre
Father,
Santo, ha riconosciuto l'esistenza
have also
di
recognized
un
the
debito
existence
ecologico
of an
dei
ecological
paesi
debt owed
industrializzati
by industrialized
verso il
nations to
sud
the
del
global
mondo,
south,
che deve pagare doppiamente
which
lo
pays doubly for the
sfruttamento
exploitation
di
it
cui è
suffers.
Padre Santo, mi permette umilmente di fare mio il suo invito in occasione dell'apertura della Porta Santa.
Your Holiness, allow me to humbly take up your invitation during the opening of the Holy Door at Rabibia Prison on December 26th. Throw open the doors of your heart. Everyone knows how to do it. Everyone knows where the door is closed or half closed. Everyone knows. The revolution begins with each of us, starting within ourselves. We must learn to love ourselves and to love others. As you affirm in your encyclical Dilexit Nos, there is an urgent, pressing need for the world, amidst wars and imbalances, to recover what is most important, the heart. Holy Father, finally, I ask you to accept our most fervent wishes for a happy and healthy new year. On behalf of the diplomatic family I represent as Dean, I wish to thank you for your tireless work, a source of hope for so many peoples, so many women and men. Thank you. The address of the Dean. His Excellency George Politis, Ambassador of Cyprus and Dean of the Diplomatic Corps. And the ambassador approaches the Holy Father and greets him with a handshake. Now we'll hear the Holy Father's remarks to the Diplomatic Corps accredited to the Holy See for 2025.
Eccellenze, signore, signori, ci ritroviamo stamani per un momento di incontro che, al di là del suo carattere
Your Excellency, ladies and gentlemen, we have come together this morning for a meeting that, apart from its institutional character, seeks above all to be a family event, a moment in which The family of people symbolically gathers through your presence to exchange fraternal good wishes, to leave behind the disputes that divide us, and instead to find what unites us. At the beginning of this year, which is particularly meaningful for the Catholic Church, our coming together has a symbolism all its own. For the Jubilee is meant to help us step back from the increasingly frenzied pace of daily life in order to be refreshed and nourished by what is truly essential. In a word, to rediscover ourselves in Him as children of God and as brothers and sisters. To pardon offenses, to support the weak and the poor in our midst, to give rest and relief to the earth, to practice justice and to recover hope. This is a summons to all those who serve the common good and to exercise the lofty expression of charity that is Paradix. And he hands off his address to be read for him.
Con questo spirito vi accolgo, ringraziando anzitutto Sua Eccellenza, l'ambasciatore Pulides, decano del corpo diplomatico, per le parole con cui si è fatto interprete dei vostri
In this spirit I offer you a warm welcome. First of all, I thank His Excellency Ambassador George Pulides, Dean of the Diplomatic Corps, for his kind words conveying your shared sentiments. To all of you, I express my gratitude for the affection and esteem for the Apostolic See shown by your peoples and governments, whom you capably represent. This is seen by the visits of more than 30 heads of state or government, whom I had the joy of receiving in the Vatican in 2024, as well as the signing of the second additional protocol to the agreement between the Holy See and Burkina Faso on the legal status of the Catholic Church in Burkina Faso, and the agreement between the Holy See and the Czech Republic on some legal questions signed during the course of the past year. Then, last October, the provisional agreement between the Holy See and the People's Republic of China regarding the appointment of bishops was renewed for a further 4 years, a sign of the desire to continue a respectful and constructive dialogue in view of the good of the Catholic Church in the country and of all the Chinese people. For my part, I have sought to reciprocate this affection by my recent apostolic journeys, which have taken me to such distant lands as Indonesia, Papua New Guinea, Timor-Leste, and Singapore, as well as to nearer countries such as Belgium and Luxembourg, and most recently, Corsica. Although they are obviously very different destinations, each trip represents an opportunity for me to meet and engage in dialogue with different peoples, cultures, and religious traditions, and to bring a word of encouragement and comfort, especially to those in greatest need. Added to these trips are the 3 visits I've made here in Italy, made to Verona, Venice, and Trieste. It is to the Italian authorities, national and local, that I would like, at the beginning of this Jubilee year, to express my particular gratitude for the efforts made to prepare Rome for the Jubilee. The unremitting work of these months, which has caused not a few inconveniences, is now being compensated for by the improvement of certain services and public spaces, so that everyone, citizens, pilgrims, and tourists, can enjoy even more the beauty of the Eternal City. To the people of Rome, known for their hospitality, I address a special word of thanks for the patience they've shown in recent months, but also for that which they will show in welcoming the many visitors who arrived this year. I would like to offer my heartfelt thanks to the police forces, the civil protection and healthcare authorities, and all those volunteers who are doing their utmost each day to guarantee security and a peaceful Jubilee.
Cari ambasciatori, nelle parole del profeta Isaia che il Signore Gesù fa proprie nella sinagoga di Nazareth all'inizio della sua vita
Dear ambassadors, in the words of the prophet Isaiah, which the Lord Jesus read in the synagogue of Nazareth at the start of his public life, we also learn from the evangelist Luke. We find epitomized not only the mystery of Christmas that we've just celebrated, but also of the present Jubilee. Christ came to bring good news to the oppressed, to bind up the brokenhearted, to proclaim liberty to the captives, and release to the prisoners, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor. Sadly, we begin this year as the world finds itself rent by numerous conflicts, large and small, more or less known, but also by the resumption of heinous acts of terror, such as those that recently occurred in Magdeburg in Germany and in New Orleans in the United States. We also observe in many countries growing conflictual social and political tensions. We see increasingly polarized societies marked by a general sense of fear and a distrust of others and of the future, which is aggravated by the continuous creation and spread of fake news, which not only distorts facts, but also perceptions. This phenomenon generates false images of reality, a climate of suspicion that foments hate, undermines people's sense of security, and compromises civil coexistence and the stability of entire nations. Tragic examples of this are the attacks on the chairman of the government of the Slovak Republic and on the president-elect of the United States of America. This climate of insecurity leads to the erection of new barriers and the drawing of new borders, whereas others, such as the one that has divided the island of Cyprus for over 50 years, and the one that is cut in two the Korean peninsula for over 70 years, remain firmly in place, separating families and splitting up homes and cities. These modern borders presume to be lines of identity demarcation, where diversity becomes a reason for mistrust, distrust, and fear. Whoever comes from there cannot be trusted, for it is unknown, unfamiliar, not part of the village. As a result, new walls are erected for self-preservation. The outside world ceases to exist and leaves only my world, to the point that others, no longer considered human beings possessed of an inalienable dignity, become only them. It's a quote from Fratelli Tutti. Ironically, the word border, confine in Italian, does not mean a place that separates, but one that unites. Cum finis, where one can meet others, get to know them, and enter into dialogue with them. My powerful hope for this new year is that the Jubilee may represent for everyone, Christians and non-Christians alike, an opportunity also to rethink the relationships that bind us to one another as human beings and political communities, but also to overcome the logic of confrontation and embrace instead the logic of encounter, so that the future does not find us hopelessly adrift, but pressing forward as pilgrims of hope, individuals and communities on the move, committed to building a future of peace. Furthermore, in the face of the increasingly concrete threat of a world war, the vocation of diplomacy is to foster dialogue with all parties, including those interlocutors considered less convenient, or not considered legitimized to negotiate. Only in this way is it possible to break the chains of hatred and vengeance that bind and to diffuse the explosive power of human selfishness, pride, and arrogance, which are the root of every destructive determination to wage war.
Alla luce di queste brevi considerazioni, vorrei tracciare con voi questa
Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, in the light of these brief considerations, I'd like to trace with you this morning, starting from the words of the prophet Isaiah, some features of a diplomacy of hope, of which all of us are called to be heralds, so that the dense clouds of war may be swept away by renewed winds of peace. More generally, I would like to highlight some responsibilities that every political leader should bear in mind in fulfilling his or her responsibilities, which ought to be directed towards pursuing the common good and the integral development of the human person, bringing good news to the oppressed. In every time and place, human beings have always been attracted by the idea that they can be sufficient unto themselves and the architects of their own destiny. Whenever we allow ourselves to be dominated by such presumptions, we find ourselves forced by external events and circumstances to realize that we are frail and powerless, poor and needy, subject to spiritual and material adversity. In a word, we discover our misery and our need for someone to save us from it.
Numerose sono le miserie del nostro tempo. Mai come in quest'epoca l'umanità ha sperimentato progresso, sviluppo e
Great is the misery of our time. More than ever before, humanity has come to know progress, development, and wealth. Yet perhaps never before has it found itself so lonely and lost, even at times preferring pets to children. There is an urgent need to hear glad tidings that from the Christian perspective, God offers us on Christmas night. Even so, everyone, even those who are not believers, can become the bearers of a message of hope and truth. Human beings, for that matter, are endowed with an innate thirst for truth. That is a fundamental aspect of our human condition, as everyone carries deep within a longing for objective truth and an irrepressible desire for knowledge. Well, this has always been the case. In our time, the denial of self-evident truths seems to have gained the upper hand. Some distrust rational argumentation, believing it to be a tool in the hands of some unseen power, while others believe that they unequivocally possess a truth of their own making, and are thus exempt from discussion and dialogue with those who think differently. Others tend to invent their own truth, disregarding the objectivity of reality. These tendencies can be amplified by the modern communications media and by artificial intelligence. They can be misused to manipulate minds for economic, political, and ideological ends.
Il moderno progresso scientifico, specialmente nell'ambito informatico e della comunicazione,
modern scientific progress, especially in the area of information and communications technology, has brought undoubted benefits for mankind. It has allowed us to simplify many aspects of daily life, to stay in touch with loved ones, even if they are physically far away, to remain informed and to increase our knowledge. At the same time, its limitations and dangers cannot be overlooked, since it often contributes to polarization, a narrowing of intellectual perspectives, a simplification of reality, misuse, anxiety, and, ironically, isolation, particularly as a result of the use of social media and online games. The growth of artificial intelligence raises broader concerns about intellectual property rights, the job security of millions of people, the need to respect privacy, and to protect the environment from e-waste. Hardly any corner of our world has been left untouched by the broad cultural transformation brought about by the rapid advances in technology, whose alignment to commercial interests is increasingly evident, generating a culture rooted in consumerism. This imbalance threatens to subvert the order of values inherent in the creation of relationships, education, and the transmission of social mores, whereas parents, close relatives, and educators must remain the main channels for the transmission of culture, for the sake of which governments should limit themselves to providing support for them in their educational responsibilities. Here we see the importance of media literacy education, which aims to provide the essential tools needed to promote critical thinking skills, to equip young people for the necessary means for their personal growth and their active participation in the future of their societies.
È perciò anzitutto una diplomazia della verità.
A diplomacy of hope is consequently, above all, a diplomacy of truth. If the link between reality, truth, and knowledge is missing, human beings will no longer be able to speak and understand one another, because the foundations of a common language, anchored in the reality of things, and therefore universally comprehensible, are lacking. The purpose of language is communication, which is only successful if words are precise and the meaning of terms is generally accepted. The biblical account of the Tower of Babel shows what happens when everyone speaks only in his or her own language.
Comunicazione, dialogo e impegno per il bene comune richiedono
Communication, dialogue, and commitment to the common good thus require good faith and adherence to a common language. This is particularly the case in the diplomatic sphere, especially in multilateral contexts. The impact and success of any statements, declarations, resolutions, and more generally negotiated texts depends on this. It is a proven fact that multilateralism is only strong and effective when it focuses on the issues at hand and uses simple, clear, and agreed language. As a result, the attempt to manipulate multilateral documents by changing the meaning of terms or unilaterally reinterpreting the content of human rights treaties in order to advance divisive ideologies that trample on the values and beliefs of peoples is particularly worrying. It represents a form of genuine ideological colonization that attempts, in accordance with carefully planned agendas, to uproot the traditions, history, and religious bonds of peoples. This is a mentality that, by claiming to leave behind what are considered to be the dark pages of history, opens the door to the cancel culture. It tolerates no differences and focuses on individual rights to the detriment of duties toward others, especially the weakest and most vulnerable. In this regard, it is unacceptable, for example, to speak of an alleged right to abortion that contradicts human rights, particularly the right to life. All life must be protected at every moment, from conception to natural death, because no child is a mistake or guilty for existing, just as no elderly or sick person may be deprived of hope and discarded. This approach is particularly relevant in the context of the different multilateral bodies. I think in particular of the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, of which the Holy See is a founding member, having taken an active part in the negotiations that half a century ago led to the Declaration of Helsinki of 1975. It is more urgent than ever to recover the spirit of Helsinki, with which opposing states considered enemies succeeded in creating a space of encounter and did not abandon dialogue as a means of resolving conflicts. Yet the multilateral institutions, most of which came into being at the end of World War II, some 80 years ago, no longer seem capable of ensuring peace and stability, or of carrying on the fight against hunger and promoting the development for which they were created. Nor do they seem able to respond in a truly effective way to the new challenges of this 21st century, such as environmental, public health, cultural, and social issues, to say nothing of the challenges posed by artificial intelligence. Many of them are in need of reform, bearing in mind that any such reform needs to be based on the principles of subsidiarity and solidarity, and respect for the equal sovereignty of states. Regrettably, the risk exists of a monadology and of a fragmentation into like-minded clubs that only let in those who think in the same way. Nevertheless, there have been and continue to be encouraging signs wherever there is goodwill to come together. I think of the Treaty of Peace and Friendship between Chile and Argentina, signed in Vatican City on November 29, 1984, which, with the mediation of the Holy See and the goodwill of the parties, put an end to the Beagle Channel dispute. In this way, it showed that peace and friendship are possible when two members of the international community renounce the use of force and solemnly commit themselves to respecting all the rules of international law and promoting bilateral cooperation. More recently, I think of the positive signs of a resumption of negotiations to return to the framework of the Iran nuclear deal, with the aim of ensuring a safer world for all.
Fasciare le piaghe dei cuori spezzati.
Binding up the broken-hearted. A diplomacy of hope is also a diplomacy of forgiveness, capable at a time full of open or latent conflicts of mending relationships torn by hatred and violence, and thus caring for the broken hearts of their all too numerous victims. My wish for the year 2025 is that the entire international community will work above all to end the conflict that for almost 3 years now has caused so much bloodshed in war-torn Ukraine and has taken an enormous toll of lives, including those of many civilians. Some encouraging signs have appeared on the horizon, but much work must still be done to create the conditions for a just and lasting peace, and to heal the wounds inflicted by the aggression. Similarly, I renew my appeal for a ceasefire and the release of the Israeli hostages in Gaza, where there is a very serious and shameful humanitarian situation. And I ask that the Palestinian population receive all the aid it needs. My powerful hope is that Israelis and Palestinians can rebuild the bridges of dialogue and mutual trust, starting with the smallest, so that future generations can live side by side in two states, in peace and security, and that Jerusalem can be the city of encounter, where Christians, Jews, and Muslims live together in harmony and respect. Just last June, in the Vatican Gardens, we joined in commemorating the 10th anniversary of the Invocation for Peace in the Holy Land, that on June 8, 2014, saw the presence of the then President of the State of Israel, Shimon Peres, and the President of the State of Palestine, Mahmoud Abbas, along with the Patriarch Bartholomew I. That meeting bore witness to the fact that dialogue is always possible and that we cannot give in to the idea that enmity and hatred between peoples will have the upper hand.
Che la guerra è alimentata dal continuo
At the same time, it must also be pointed out that war is fueled by the continued proliferation of ever more sophisticated and destructive weapons. This morning, I reiterate my appeal that with the money spent on weapons and other military expenditures, let us establish a global fund that can finally put an end to hunger and favor development in the most impoverished countries, so that their citizens will not resort to violent or illusory solutions or have to leave their countries in order to seek a more dignified life. War is always a failure. The involvement of civilians, especially children, and the destruction of infrastructures is not only a disaster, but essentially means that between the two sides, only evil emerges the winner. We cannot in any way accept the bombing of civilians or the attacking of infrastructures necessary for their survival. We cannot accept that children are freezing to death because hospitals have been destroyed or a country's energy network has been hit. The entire international community seems to agree on the need to respect international humanitarian law, yet its failure to implement that law fully and concretely raises questions. If we have forgotten what lies at the very foundation of our existence, the sacredness of life, the principles that move the world, how can we think that this right is effectively respected? We need to recover these values and to embody them in precepts of the public conscience so that the principle of humanity will truly be the basis of our activity. I trust then that this Jubilee year will be a favorable moment in which the international community will take active steps to ensure that inviolable human rights are not sacrificed to military needs. On this basis, I ask that efforts are made to continue to ensure that disregard for international humanitarian law may no longer be an option. Greater efforts are also needed to ensure that the matters discussed at the 34th International Conference of the Red Cross and Red Crescent that took place last October in Geneva will be acted upon. The 75th anniversary of the Geneva Conventions has just been commemorated, and it remains imperative that the norms and the principles on which those conventions are based will be implemented in the all too many open theaters of war. Among these, I think of the various conflicts that persist on the African continent, particularly in Sudan, the Sahel, the Horn of Africa, Mozambique, where a serious political crisis is underway, and in the eastern regions of the Democratic Republic of the Congo, where the population suffers from serious health and humanitarian need, at times aggravated by the scourge of terrorism, resulting in loss of life and the displacement of millions of people. To this we can add the devastating effects of floods and drought, which worsen already precarious conditions in various parts of Africa.
Non è però chiamata solo a sanare I conflitti internazionali o regionali. Essa investe ciascuno delle
To this we can add the devastating effects of flood and drought, which worsen already precarious conditions in various parts of Africa. The prospect of a diplomacy of forgiveness is not, however, meant to heal international or regional conflicts by itself. It makes everyone responsible for becoming an artisan of peace in order to build truly peaceful societies in which legitimate political, but also social, cultural, ethnic, and religious differences constitute an asset and not a source of hatred and division. I think in a special way of Myanmar, where the population suffers greatly from the constant armed clashes that are forcing people to flee their homes and to live in fear. It's also painful to see that there are still, especially in the Americas, various situations of heated political and social conflict. I think of Haiti, where I trust the necessary steps can be taken as soon as possible to re-establish democratic order and put an end to the violence. I think too of Venezuela and the grave political crisis it is experiencing, which can only be overcome by sincere adherence to the values of truth, justice, and freedom, by respect for the life, dignity, and rights of every person, including those arrested as a result of the events of recent months, by the rejection of every form of violence, and, let us hope, by the start of negotiations in good faith and aimed at the common good of the country. Likewise, I think of Bolivia, which is experiencing a troubled political, social, and economic situation, and Colombia, where I trust that with everyone's help, there can be an end to the many conflicts that have long torn the country apart. Lastly, I think of Nicaragua, where the Holy See, which is always open to respectful and constructive dialogue, follows with concern the measures taken against individuals and institutions of the Church, and asks that religious freedom and other fundamental rights be adequately guaranteed to all. In the end, there can be no true peace without the guarantee of religious freedom, which entails respect for the conscience of individuals and the possibility of publicly manifesting one's faith and membership in a community. In this regard, the growing expressions of anti-Semitism, which I strongly condemn, and which affect an increasing number of Jewish communities around the world, are a source of deep concern.
Persecuzioni contro varie comunità cristiane, spesso perpetrate da gruppi terroristici, specialmente in Africa e in Asia.
Nor can I remain silent about the numerous persecutions against various Christian communities, often perpetrated by terrorist groups, especially in Africa and Asia, nor, for that matter, about the more discreet forms of restriction on religious freedom that at times are found also in Europe, where legal norms and administrative practices are growing that limit or in fact annul the rights formally recognized by the Constitution for individual believers and religious groups. In this regard, I'd reiterate that religious freedom constitutes an achievement of a sound political and juridical culture, because when it is acknowledged, the dignity of the human person is respected at its root, and the ethos and institutions of peoples are strengthened. Christians are able and desire actively to contribute to the building up of the societies in which they live. Even where they are not a majority in society, they are citizens in their own right, especially in those lands where they have lived from time immemorial.
Mi riferisco in modo particolare alla Siria, che dopo anni di guerra e devastazione
I'm speaking especially of Syria, which after years of war and devastation seems to be pursuing a path of stability. I hope that the territorial integrity, the unity of the Syrian people, and the necessary constitutional reforms will not be compromised by anyone, and that the international community will help Syria to be a land of peaceful coexistence, where all Syrians, including the Christian community, can feel themselves to be full citizens and share in the common good of that beloved nation.
Parimenti penso all'amato Libano, auspicando che il
I
Paese,
think too
con
of
l'aiuto
beloved Lebanon
determinante
and
della
express my
componente
hope that the
cristiana,
country,
possa
with the
avere la
decisive help of
necessaria
its Christian
stabilità
community,
istituzionale
can
per
possess the
affrontare
necessary
la grave
institutional
situazione
stability
economica
needed
e
to address
sociale,
the grave
ricostruire il
economic and
sud del
social
Paese
situation,
colpito dalla guerra
to
e
rebuild the south of the
implementare
country affected by
pienamente la
war,
Costituzione e
and
gli
fully
accordi di Taif.
implement the Constitution
Tutti i libanesi
and the
lavorino affinché
Taif
il volto
Agreement.
del Paese dei
May
cedri
all Lebanese
non
work to
sia mai
ensure that the
sfigurato dalla
country of the great
divisione,
cedars
ma
is never
risplenda
disfigured
sempre
by
per il
division,
vivere insieme.
but rather
Che il
distinguished
Libano
for living
rimanga un
together.
paese messaggio
May
di
Lebanon remain a
coesistenza e di
country
pace.
and a message of coexistence and peace,
Proclamare la libertà degli schiavi.
proclaiming liberty to the
2000 anni di
captives.
cristianesimo hanno contribuito a eliminare la schiavitù da ogni ordinamento giuridico. Ciò nonostante, esistono ancora molteplici forme di schiavitù.
2,000 years of Christianity have helped eliminate slavery from every legal system. Nonetheless, many forms of slavery still exist, starting with the seldom acknowledged but widely practiced form of slavery that involves labor. Too many people live as slaves to their work, which from a means becomes an end, and are frequently chained to inhuman working conditions in terms of safety, working hours, and wages. Efforts need to be made to create dignified working conditions so that work, which is in itself noble and ennobling, does not become an obstacle to the fulfillment and growth of the human person. At the same time, there is a need to ensure that real job opportunities exist, especially where widespread unemployment encourages undeclared work and consequently crime.
Esiste poi l'orribile schiavitù delle tossicodipendenze.
Then there is the horrible slavery of drug addiction, which affects young people in particular. It is unacceptable to see the number of lives, families, and countries being ruined by this scourge, which appears to be on the rise, not least because of the advent of often deadly synthetic drugs, widely available as a result of the heinous phenomenon of drug trafficking. Among other forms of slavery in our day, one of the most dreadful is due to human trafficking by unscrupulous people who exploit the needs of thousands of people fleeing war, famine, persecution, or the effects of climate change in search of a safe place to live.
Una diplomazia della speranza è una diplomazia di libertà.
A diplomacy of hope is a diplomacy of freedom, which calls for the common commitment of the international community to eliminate this horrid commerce.
In pari tempo, occorre prendersi cura delle vittime di questi traffici.
At the same time, there is a need to care for the victims of this trafficking, the migrants themselves, who are forced to walk thousands of kilometers in Central America or in the Sahara Desert, or to cross the Mediterranean Sea or the English Channel in overcrowded, makeshift boats, only to be turned away or forced to live clandestinely in a foreign country. We can easily forget that we are dealing with real persons who ought to be welcomed, protected, promoted, and integrated.
Con grande sconforto rilevo invece che le migrazioni sono ancora
I find it incredibly disheartening to see that migration is still shrouded in a dark cloud of mistrust, rather than being seen as a source of empowerment. People on the move are seen simply as a problem to be managed. They cannot be treated like objects to be moved about. They have dignity and resources that they can offer to others. They have their own experiences, needs, fears, aspirations, dreams, skills, and talents. It is only by viewing things in this perspective that progress can be made in confronting a phenomenon that requires the contribution of all countries, not least through the creation of safe, regular pathways.
Rimane poi cruciale affrontare le cause profonde dello spostamento, affinché lasciare la propria casa.
Then, too, it is crucial that we address the root causes of displacement, so that leaving one's home to look for another is a choice and not a necessary means of survival. With this in mind, I consider a common commitment to cooperation in development as a means of helping eliminate some of the causes leading people to migrate to be essential. Proclaiming release to prisoners. The diplomacy of hope is, in the end, a diplomacy of justice, without which there can be no peace. This Jubilee year is a favorable time to practice justice, to forgive debts, and to commute the sentences of prisoners. However, there is no debt that allows anyone, including the state, to demand the life of another. In this regard, I reiterate my call for the death penalty to be eliminated in every nation, since it finds no justification today among the instruments capable of restoring justice. Nor can we forget that in some sense we are all prisoners, for all of us are debtors to God, to others, and also to our beloved earth, from which we draw our daily sustenance. As I observed in my annual message for the World Day of Peace, each of us must feel in some way responsible for the devastation to which the earth, our common home, has been subjected. Increasingly, nature itself seems to be rebelling against human action by extreme manifestations of its power. Examples of this are the devastating floods in Central Europe and Spain, the cyclones that hit Madagascar in the spring, and just before Christmas, the French department of Mayotte and Mozambique. We cannot remain indifferent in the face of all of this. We do not have the right. Rather, we have a duty to make the greatest effort to care for our common home and its inhabitants, now and in the future. At COP29 in Baku, decisions were made to secure greater financial resources for climate action. I trust that these will allow for the sharing of resources for the many countries greatly affected by the climate crisis and burdened by oppressive economic debt. With this in mind, I ask the wealthier nations to forgive the debts of countries that will never be able to repay them. This is not simply an act of solidarity or generosity, but above all an act of justice, also in the light of a new form of inequality of which we are increasingly aware today. The ecological debt that exists particularly between the global north and south. Also, in light of this ecological debt, it is important to find effective ways to convert the external debt of poor countries into effective, creative, and responsible policies and programs to promote an integral human development. The Holy See is prepared to accompany this process in the knowledge that there are no longer any borders or barriers, political or social, behind which we can hide.
Prima di concludere, vorrei esprimere in questa sede il mio cordoglio e la mia preghiera per le vittime e per quanti stanno soffrendo a causa del terremoto che 2 giorni fa ha colpito il Tibet.
Praise and extends condolences for the earthquake that struck Tibet a few days ago. Dear ambassadors, from the Christian standpoint, the Jubilee is a season of grace. How I would like this year, 2025, to be truly a year of grace, abounding in truth, forgiveness, freedom, justice, and peace. In the heart of each person, hope dwells as the desire and expectation of good things to come, and each of us is called to make hope flourish all around us. This is my heartfelt wish for all of you, dear ambassadors, for your families and for the governments and peoples that you represent. May hope flourish in our hearts, and may our time find the peace for which it so greatly longs. Thank you. And that was our Holy Father's address to ambassadors of the accredited to the Holy See, who now rise to receive the Holy Father's blessing.
Domino vobiscum. Sin nomen Domini benedictum. Et Domini nostro in nomine Domini. Benedicat vos omnipotens Deus, Pater, Filii, Spiritus Sancti. Amen.
And the Holy Father concludes the formal part of this morning's audience with his blessing for diplomats who are present here today.
Eccellenze, signori, si invitano cortesemente i capi missione, accompagnati dai rispettivi consorti, a dirigersi verso l'incontro col Santo Padre e i superiori della Segreteria di Stato per il saluto personale, seguendo le indicazioni fornite dal nostro personale addetto. Al termine del saluto, i capi missioni sono pregati di recarsi senza i consorti presso la Cappella Sistina per la foto di gruppo.
And a few instructions there for the diplomats for the purposes of meeting with the Holy Father, now repeated in English.
Accompanied by their respective spouses are kindly invited to proceed to the meeting with the Holy Father and the superiors of the Secretary of State for a personal greeting, following the directions provided by our staff. At the conclusion of the greeting, the heads of mission are requested to proceed without their spouses to the Sistine Chapel for the group photograph. All other members of the diplomatic entourages are kindly asked to remain in their assigned seats.
And as you heard, a few instructions for those present at this morning's audience. The heads of the various diplomatic missions to the Holy See are brought up in order to say a few words and exchange greetings with Pope Francis, who receives each of them individually with their spouses. Afterwards, they'll also have an opportunity to say hello to Cardinal Parolin, the Secretary of State, as well as members of the Secretariat of State's leadership. And we'll take part in a group photo in the Sistine Chapel, as you just heard. The Holy Father concluded his address with the hope that the new year might abound in truth, forgiveness, freedom, justice, and peace, that it might be truly a year of grace. And he invited them to make hope flourish all around us. And with the individual greetings, we are going to bring our broadcast to a close. Thanks once again to all of those joining us for this morning's broadcast of the Pope's address to members of the Diplomatic Corps, accredited to the Holy See. On behalf of Vatican Radio, I'd like to thank our partners who help make these live broadcasts available throughout the world, especially EWTN TV, Catholic Faith Network in America, Shalom World TV, at Madarshan TV, and Catholic TV. We'll have full coverage of this morning's audience and the Pope's speech, along with other Vatican and world news on our Vatican News web portal, as well as our Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube accounts. Many thanks, too, to our producers and technicians here in studio, who make this broadcast possible. And thanks to all of you for joining us today. My name is Christopher Wells. It has been a great pleasure providing the English language translation for the Pope's address this morning. Praise be Jesus Christ. Laudetur Jesus Christus.